How many of you have watched the play Hamilton? It's the story of Alexander Hamilton's life put to rap music and R&B music. And in honor of that, I'm actually going to rap the rest of this message today. Just kidding, that's not true. That would be a disaster. If you haven't seen it, this summer the play became available on Disney+. So you can actually watch the video of the play. I tell you that because one of the themes running through the storyline is about legacy and influence. What will you be remembered for? And it's not the kind of legacy that you pass down from a parent to a son or a daughter, but it's the kind of legacy that asks this question: what will you be remembered for? And all these characters in the play, they're trying to build their platform so that they have influence with people. And unfortunately, Aaron Burr finds out that he's really only remembered for shooting Alexander Hamilton in a duel. Innately, we all ask the same question: what will we be remembered for? Listen, we want our influence to matter. We want our influence on people on behalf of God to count. But in all honesty, we can easily wonder, are we really making an impact with people? This is an honest, true story. Last night, I had this nightmare. I had this nightmare that I was actually in this room, and I was speaking a message to a crowd of people, and that sounds awesome because I haven't spoken to a crowd of people in months. But as I was speaking, I got to the end of my message telling this final story that was this moving story, and a couple of people got up and walked out. And then a couple of people followed them. In less than 10 seconds, I realized I was standing in the auditorium all alone, like I am right now. That's a nightmare for a pastor. Why? Because we want our influence to matter. We want our influence to be helpful for people. Listen, you're no different. You want your influence to matter, right? You want to know that you're making some kind of contribution to people that make people's lives better. Now listen, there is a powerful tool when it comes to influence. And the tool is this. It's the power of your story. Telling your story can bring wisdom to people. It can bring comfort. It can bring hope. It can bring encouragement. It can bring unique insights or powerful truth. Telling your story can change a person's life. But there's a problem with our story. Our story is sometimes a broken story. It can be a disappointing story. It can be a defeated story. It can actually be a failed story, or in all honesty, it can be a boring story, right? We can wonder whether anyone would really be changed or impacted or influenced to follow God based on our story. And maybe like my nightmare, we might wonder if people would walk out in the middle of our story because our influence isn't really making a difference. So we come to this part in our series that we've called Made a Way, because in Exodus, God made a way for his people out of Egypt. And every week we're talking about how God made a way for us out of sin into life with him. We're in this part where all of the action ceases. I mean, the drama of them escaping Egypt and walking through this Red Sea where there should be water and a battle with the Amalekites. I mean, all of this action stops, and Moses has a family reunion where he tells his story. And he tells his story so that he finds influence with someone. This is all found in Exodus chapter 18. So grab your Bibles. Just don't listen to me tell this story. I want you to see this for yourselves. And I want you to think about this question as I read the story. The question is this: what's your story? What's the story that you're telling that influences people? I'm in chapter 18, verse 1. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. Now the thought is this, is that when it really got dangerous, or when they came across the Red Sea, that Moses sent his wife and his 2 kids back to his father-in-law, to Jethro, to give a report. And now they were all coming back. But then Moses makes a really big deal about his 2 sons. Listen to this. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, I've become a foreigner in a foreign land. And the other was named Eleazar, for he said, my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. before Moses ever gets into the main story that he wants to tell, for some reason, he makes a big deal about his two sons. Because his two sons articulate the two seasons or the two chapters of Moses' story. Here's the name of his first son, which illustrates the first chapter of Moses' life. His name is Gershom. And he names him Gershom because it means I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. Do you remember this part of Moses' story? Moses was in Egypt after growing up in Pharaoh's household, and he could not stomach how the Egyptians were abusing, mistreating these Israelites. And one day he just snaps, and Moses takes justice into his own hand, and he kills an Egyptian, and he hid the body, trying to keep it a secret. But someone saw him, and then they ratted him out. Moses flees Egypt, runs away, and he's now a stranger in a strange land. This was his Gershom season. Moses was a stranger in a strange land that was not his own. Put yourself in Moses' place. The only life you've ever known is gone. You don't belong to the Egyptians. You don't even belong to the Israelites. You don't belong to the people around you right now. Listen, you just don't belong. You ran away from your old life because you messed up. You tried to keep it a secret. And you don't even know where you go from here. My guess is this: you've had a Gershom season in your life. Maybe you're even in it right now. The Gershom season, it's a season where you feel like you don't belong. It's a season marked by brokenness and failure. It's a season when the future is unclear. It's a season where you question who you are and how your life matters. It's a season where your bad decisions catch up with you. It's a season of disappointment, depression, frustration. Have you had a Gershom season? Do you actually know that part of your story? Moses' second son, he tells us, his name is Eleazar. His name is meant to describe the second chapter of Moses' life. And he uses these words: my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. That's the Eleazar season. That's what his son's name means. Now, first of all, don't you want to be Eleazar, not Gershom, right? I mean, chapter 1 is a bad chapter of the story. Chapter 2, the Eleazar season. It's a season of victory, triumph, and overcoming. It's a season of being set free. It's a season that you want to write a book about, tell a story about. It's a story worth telling, right? It's a season that feels great to be alive. The Eleazar season is a season where you see that God has been with you, protecting you, helping you, giving you wisdom and direction. It's a season where you see God show up and show off, right? Have you had the Eleazar season in your life? Do you know that part of your story? Do you remember when the God whom your parents talked about finally became your helper? Listen, if you're in high school, you're in college, you're in your 20s, if your parents are believers, this is what they've been praying for. They've been praying for the Eleazar season of your life, where God is no longer your parents' God, but he's actually your God. And so many of you have already been through this moment. But honestly, maybe some of your parents, they weren't Christians. But you heard about God from someone else. God was their God. But one day in your story, God became real to you. And you finally saw that he was with you, not just with them. So don't miss this. It's often in the Gershom season, the low, hard, difficult seasons, that we cry out to God. And in those moments, God meets us in a real way, and we move from this Gershom season to this Eleazar season. Do you know both parts of your story? Hear me in this. The power of your story is in knowing both parts and being able to tell both parts of your story, and here's why. The worse the odds, the sweeter the victory. The worse the odds, the sweeter the victory. Isn't that what makes stories so powerful? The greater the Gershom season, the more amazing God appears when he leads us to an Eleazar season. Now, this is what the Apostle Paul wrote about when he told his own story. He's writing to Timothy, and he says this in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15. He says, here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I'm the worst. There's his Gershom season. Then he says, but for that very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his immense patience as an example for those who would believe in him and receive eternal life. He's saying, man, I had this Gershom season, now I'm in my Eliezer season. The reason God brought the worst person on the earth, persecuting the church, imprisoning believers, killing believers, and had patience with me, turned my life to this Eliezer season where I realized that God was with me, forgave me, loved me, wanted me. That's Paul's story, and he tells both seasons of his life. Any soccer fans out there? This year, during the global pandemic, Liverpool won the Premier League. And there's some soccer fans that you just finally stood up at this moment. You're like, yeah. What made it so great, though? It's that this year when they won, it ended a 30-year drought from them winning the championship. It's the 30-year drought, their Gershom seasons, that made the Eliezer moment so powerful. Here it is. You have a story to tell. You have a story to tell that will influence people. In your story, embrace both your broken season and your victorious season. Here's why. This is in your notes. When you tell your story, watch how you impress with your accolades, but connect with your weaknesses. Here it is. When you tell your story, watch how you impress with your accolades, but connect with your weaknesses. Telling the story about our best moments, they will impress people. And that's good because it can give them hope that change and victory are possible. But if all we ever tell is the victory part of our story, then we risk just trying to impress people with our accolades. When we talk about our Gershom seasons, our broken moments, our regrets, the moments where our bad decisions, they've caught up with us, we actually create connection with people. Those connection moments, they invoke sympathy in people. And those connection moments, they can bring healing and comfort. It can help people realize that in their broken state that they are not alone. Maybe you've been to an AA meeting. You'll hear all about people's Gershom stories, which create connection and sympathy for people who are at a low place in their lives. But don't miss this. Our stories can't just be Gershom moments to create sympathy. We need to tell the story about how God has helped us. We need those Eliezer stories, those moments of victory, because sympathy without hope and change doesn't actually move people. It just makes people feel better about their brokenness, and that's not the point of our stories. When you tell your story, watch how you impress people with your accolades, but connect with your weaknesses. Both parts of your story matter. Let's get back to Moses. He hasn't even told his story. He's just told the story about his sons. As I tell this, we're asking this question. Not just what's your story, ask this question. What is God's story? Look at verse 7. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Verse 8. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, and how the Lord had saved them. They go into this tent and they share a meal. I wonder how long that meal was. I mean, how long did it take Moses to tell the whole story, right? I mean, because we all know there are some people who can drag out a story. Most of them are pastors, right? But Moses' story begins when he leaves Jethro in the desert, and he goes back to Egypt, right? His story is about the ups and the downs of those 10 plagues in Egypt. His story is about seeing the death of the firstborn in Egypt. His story is about fleeing into the desert. His story is about seeing the Egyptian army catch up with them. His story is about the waters parting, crossing the Red Sea, and then watching the walls crash in on the Egyptian army and wiping them out. His story is about the grumbling of the people in the desert. His story is about their disobedience when God said, don't gather food, and they disobeyed him. His story is about the Amalekites attacking and the great defeat as he held the staff of God over the battle. I mean, this is all part of the story. How long did that meal take for him to tell the whole story? Here's what I don't want you to miss about how Moses told his story. It says this: Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done. This is critical. When you're going to figure out your story and how to tell your story, pay attention to this. When Moses tells the story, it's about God. God's the hero of his story. It's not about how many times that Moses went back to Pharaoh to say, let my people go. It's not about Moses' persistence or his power or his influence. The story is not about how strong Moses was to hold up the staff over the battle. God's the hero of Moses' story. When you tell your story, when you share your Gershom story and your Eleazar story, are people impressed with God or impressed with you? Oh, that's a great question. Are people impressed with God or impressed with you? Does God get the credit? Is God the hero of your story? Are you promoting yourself or glorifying God? Are you bringing attention to yourself or honoring God in the midst of your story? Moses' story was influential because it was about what God had done. Let me say it this way. When you tell your story, and this is right here in your notes, are you seeking validation or redemption? What's the difference? When you tell your story, are you seeking validation or redemption? Validation is this. Validation is you telling your side of the story so that people might think you're great. Validation is trying to prove that you are right, that you really were the victim, that you have an excuse for the brokenness of your life, how you've been maybe mistreated. Maybe validation is you justifying your story. Are you telling your story so that people might affirm you, affirm your decisions, approve of your life, or approve of the outcome of your life? That's validation. Seeking redemption is totally different. Seeking redemption is telling your story so something good comes out of your story. Not good for you, but good for them, those that are hearing your story. The difference is in who you're trying to help. Comedian Michael Jr. The guy's crazy funny. But he tells the story about how this shift became real to him. As a comedian, he was always trying to get laughs from people. But when he finally realized that comedy was a gift that God gave him that could use to give laughter to people, instead of getting laughter from them, everything shifted. So today, he doesn't just do comedy in clubs. He goes to prisons. He goes to homes for abused kids because he wants to give the gift of laughter to people. That's different. You might do the same comedy routine, but your purpose has changed. Question, when you tell your story, are you getting something from them or giving something to them? Are you helping people or honoring yourself? Listen, this is subtle and it's sometimes difficult to see sometimes. People who get involved in ministries, it doesn't have to be a pastor, it can be anybody involved in ministry, full-time, volunteer. We have to be aware of this. Are you serving? Are you helping? Are you giving? Are you contributing? Are you telling your story so that you can feel validated by God or validated by people? Or are you genuinely trying to give people something? Because the subtleness of it is sometimes it can be both. I want to shift back to our story. So Moses tells the story of how great God is and all that he did for Moses. And by the way, make note of this. He told all the great things God did and also says he shared the hardship of his story. That's what makes his story so great. So here's the question. Does Moses' story have an impact on his father-in-law? I mean, that's the question. Does Moses' life story have influence and impact? What's the influence of the story? Look at verse 9. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hands of the Egyptians. He said, "Praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians." Here's the outcome. Ready? "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly." Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. Who was Jethro? He was the priest of Midian. He was not a follower of the one true God of Israel. He's a priest of a pagan religion. And when he hears Moses' story, he has a turning point. He's a convert now. He turns away from his gods to recognize that Moses' God was greater than all. And he converts to becoming a follower. And then Jethro, he just doesn't say, oh, I recognize this, I now know this. He actually commits his life to following him. Where do I get this from? Jethro, he brings a sacrifice to God, and he shares a meal with the leaders of Israel, and all this in the presence of God. This is a sign that he is turning his life over to say, I belong to you now. I am one of you. Hear me in this. You don't control the outcome of your story. You don't control how people will respond to your story, but you do control how you see yourself, how you see God, and how you present your story. So I want to encourage you to not just share your story, but how you tell your story. And here's how we're going to wrap this up. In Psalm 107, turn there, no joke, open your Bible right now. Don't stand there looking at me on the screen. Open your Bible, Psalm 7. Here's what Psalm 7 is all about. It's one of those places that reflects on all of Israel's story, not just the Exodus. Because in Israel's history, they go through this rhythm of disobedience to God, and then they get in captivity, and then God rescues them. And then once they're rescued, he rescues them. He puts them in a place where they will flourish, and then they disobey him again and go through this whole cycle of disobedience, captivity, and rescue again. And Psalm 107 gives us this great picture of what it is that God wants his people to do. And it's for them to tell their story. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share this psalm with you backwards in reverse order. Here's how the psalm ends. Psalm 107. You got it in your Bible right now? Verse 43. This is how it ends. Let the one who is wise heed these things and ponder the loving deeds of the Lord. The entire psalm goes through the story of God's people in one of the seasons of its life, both bad and good, both the brokenness and the rescue of God. So let me say it this way. When you tell your story, highlight the goodness of God's story. Let the one who is wise heed these things. Pay attention to your story and ponder the loving deeds of the Lord. Listen, when you tell your story, you're not there to highlight yourself, but highlight the goodness of God's story. Let me say it this way. Would you please be careful in how you evangelize? Be careful in evangelizing, leading people to Jesus based on your story alone. Your story can be influential and powerful, but Jesus' story is what we should be highlighting. Let me say it this way. I'm not a follower of Christ because of my parents' story or any pastor's story. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ because of his story. Because one day, multiple days, he claimed that he would die on a cross, and then he predicted his resurrection 3 days later. And then in his story, he pulls it off, and that tomb was empty. That's why I have faith in who he is. Listen, there will always be God's people who don't represent him well. Even people that you admired and you thought, oh, their story with God is so great, and later on they messed up, and you're like, well, does that tarnish the story of God? I will tell you no, because my faith, our faith, the faith of the Christian faith is not based on people's stories, but it's actually based on Jesus' story. So be careful if you're evangelizing based on your story alone. Would you do this? Highlight the goodness of God's story. That means highlighting Jesus. Say it this way, because if you're in a Gershom season, a difficult season of your life, you might be tempted not to tell your story. You might have given up your influence with people because you don't see the next chapter where God shows up. Can I say this? Every single one of us is short-sighted in our stories. And we're short-sighted in seeing God's story. Our lives are a blip on the timeline of God's magnificent existence, which means we don't get to see it all. So be careful in evangelizing on your story alone, because your story is short, it's limited, and it's not yet complete, which means this. Please let your story highlight Jesus' story. The goodness of God's story is this. While the world was full of sinful people, God sent his son into the world because of his great love for us. So his son could die in our place so that we could be forgiven, accepted by God, and changed. When you tell your story, highlight the good story of God. Second thing is this. When you tell your story, demonstrate how grateful you are to God. Psalm 107 is divided into 5 sections, and every section is separated by this phrase. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love, his wonderful deeds for mankind. I mean, it's verse 1, verse 8, verse 15, verse 21, verse 31. They all say the same thing. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind. When you tell your story, demonstrate, show people, have the attitude of, speak with a gratefulness, how grateful you are to God. Finally, third thing is this. When you tell your story, share in a redemptive way. Look at verse 2. In verse 2 of Psalm 107, it gives us the action item. It gives us the purpose of why it is that this psalm writer writes this whole psalm. And here's his action item. It says it like this, verse 2. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those he redeemed from the hand of the foe. Why does he write this whole psalm? It's this. Tell your story. Don't keep your story silent. Let the redeemed of the Lord, those he has rescued, those he has saved, those he has purchased with the blood of Jesus, let those people tell their story. Don't be silent. Tell of your broken season, your Gershom season, and tell of your victorious season. Tell people of what God has done for you. Tell them about your Eliezer season. And when you do, though, tell it in a redemptive way, which means this. Tell it for the benefit of those who will hear it, not for your benefit. Are you helping yourself? Are you helping them? Our affirmation, our identity, our validation, our wholeness, our sense of belonging comes first from God, and no sense of affirmation from people can ever take its place. Would you dig deep into your story to know who you are in the eyes of God and let your confidence come from him, and then tell your story so that it might benefit those who listen? Your story is a powerful tool to influence people towards God. But I pray that this message would shape how you tell your story. Let's pause for a moment and let's pray. God, I want to pray for anybody who is listening to this right now. The person who has yet to cross the line of faith. God, today is their day to say yes to you. The greatest story, Lord, that needs to be told is not our story, it's Jesus' story about how he claimed he would die and come back to life, and he did it. God, you pulled it off. There is no one like you, God. And I pray that right now there would be many people on this day who finally ask for forgiveness because you died on the cross for their sins. That they would ask for that new life, a new relationship with you, and that they would have an eternity in heaven with you. God, I pray that people right now, in their living rooms, in their family rooms, in their place of business, whether driving in a car, that they would pause and say yes to you, Jesus, and commit their lives to following you. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. If you're someone who has crossed the line of faith today, can I say this? Don't let that be a secret. Let us know. Just email us. Let us be a source of encouragement to you. For those of you that you have a story to tell, may God empower you as you boldly tell your story, and more importantly, as you tell his story. God bless you.